Films in the 80s had an obsession with white middle-class suburbia. The bulk of the movie-going audience had fully transplanted themselves from the urban centers to the subdivisions, so it made sense for movie settings to follow them there. This was the decade of suburban horror, kickstarted into gear by John Carpenter in 1978, but perfected by Tobe Hooper and Steven Spielberg just a few years later with 1982's Poltergeist. At this point, the haunted castles, mad science labs, and decrepit graveyards were played out. The nation's cul-de-sacs became the final frontier, and the creeping death lurking in the shadows of our driveways made for a raw and immediate terror. But whereas Halloween kept everything on a grounded plane of reality, Poltergeist unleashes the unfathomable madness of Lovecraftian horror onto the idealized nuclear family unit centered around the altar of the new flesh, the television set. The very first shot is already alien to most people under the age of 30. Impressionistic shapes, formed across analog scan lines, set to the Star Spangled Banner, and then a fade out to fuzzy white static. Before automation and digital storage ensured broadcast signals could air uninterrupted 24/7, the master control operator of a TV station would sign off on short pre-recorded videos like this, usually patriotic or religious in nature, before shutting down the transmitter for the night. Though Hooper has the camera zoomed in so tight on the TV screen that the effect is just as eldritch for a 1982 audience, perhaps even more haunting. The framing distorts the familiar, Washington, D.C. rendered in phantasmic blur, the national anthem a funeral dirge for the broadcast day, a daily, ritualistic transition to the formless netherworld of dead air. Here in the flickering, snowy void, the titular Poltergeist preys on the youngest, most impressionable of the Freeling family, little Carol Ann. What makes television so insidious as a medium for ghosts is both its omnipresence and how it's engineered to compel and hold on to our attention. Even the active, near-flawless parenting of Steve and Diane is powerless against the radiant allure of the beast. It's no coincidence that 1982 saw two major horror releases in which a malevolent force uses the hypnotic pull of television to consume children. A year prior, Mark Fowler, the FCC chief under Ronald Reagan, relaxed broadcast standards, allowing corporations to more aggressively target kids in their TV ads, setting the stage for the toy-based cartoon shows that defined the 80s. At the time, there was a lot of anxiety over the consequences of exposing an entire generation of children to media that was more commercial than of any artistic or educational value.
Nothing can stop RoboCop. RoboCop and the Ultra Police, each sold separately with RoboCaps.
Of course, 40 years later, we now have an answer. The two highest-grossing movies are from toy companies, and our most talented and promising leading men are literal G.I. Joes. Though more to my point, that laissez-faire, market-driven telecommunications doctrine shaped multiple generations to form their entire identity around being consumers of highly merchandisable, brand-driven pop culture properties, which in turn led to corporate consolidations around those properties, mid-budget original movies being pushed out of theaters in favor of big franchises, and Martin Scorsese going through an existential crisis about the state of the industry every time he's interviewed. That FCC doctrine carried over into the internet age, and for better or worse, we now give children at a young age a limitless flow of media in the palm of their hand. And unlike the TV channels of old, there is no end of broadcast day. The algorithm keeps our media channels in a deathless state, never running out of content to be consumed, which makes it impossible for a parent to monitor what their child is seeing. It's scary out there for parents raising kids in our cyberpunk dystopia, and though 40 years old, Poltergeist captures a similar anxiety. The screens and format may have changed, but the fear of what manipulative forces may lie hidden beyond them is still present. As I said, the television in Poltergeist is the center of the consumerist utopia of Cuesta Verde. It's a box designed to sell you stuff. Lay's potato chips, Star Wars comforter sets, or a planned, tranquil suburban community where every house is perfectly uniform. You can truly have it all, but at what cost?
You son of a bitch, you moved the cemetery, but you left the bodies, didn't you? You son of a bitch, you left the bodies and you only moved the headstones! You only moved the headstones! Why? Why?
In the movie, we find out that the Freelings' house was built upon a cemetery that was hastily cleared by Stephen's development company. They treated sacred ground as if it was another slice of capital, consuming it in the name of economic progress. Likewise, the dead took their revenge by possessing all the holy symbols of middle-class suburban life. The dinner table, the TV set, the family pool, even the leftovers in the fridge become twisted and grotesque. Spielberg and Hooper don't just use the suburban setting as an instantly recognizable funhouse. Instead, Poltergeist prods the audience to reflect on the wastefulness and disregard for the history on which these neighborhoods are built on. The fear for Spielberg is not demonic spirits rising out of the ether, but our connection to the dead, and by extension the past, being raised over by our desire to consume and expand our domain at any cost. We see that theme teased out in the first act when the shoebox containing Carol Ann's deceased bird is carelessly excavated by the tractor building the Freelings' pool. Only the complete destruction of their home, along with all their material possessions, frees the Freelings from the grip of the poltergeist. And in the final shot, they reject the altarpiece of the suburban home, the television set, and Stephen presumably finds a job that doesn't evoke the ire of the dead. The rising tide of economic growth supposedly raises all boats, but there is always the danger of us losing our very sense of humanity. And I think that's why Spielberg has shifted to historical period pieces in his later years. He wants his audience to be mindful of the past, of where we came from, to guide us where we are going. I think also on a certain level, he's aware of his hand in creating the culture we find ourselves in now, where the word Spielberbia has become synonymous with an aspirational, rose-tinted view of the 80s. You see that in James Halliday in Ready Player One, and somewhat in Sammy Fabelman, creators who develop ambivalent feelings about the effect their work has on the audience. I just never realized that Spielberg was exploring these themes as early as 1982. As for Tobe Hooper, sadly his work on Poltergeist has been downplayed by the persistent rumor that he had little creative input, and that Spielberg was the true director who told Hooper where to point the camera. That narrative has been corrected a bit by retrospective interviews with cast and crew, and the movie itself is indicative of a much more collaborative creative process between the two filmmakers. The most intense horror sequences, too, had the vibe of what if Leatherface lived in the suburbs. The frenzied climax has a movement and a grime to it that feels more the Texas Chainsaw Massacre than the tightly composed action of Spielberg. The dual nature of the ghost, in a way, represent the sensibilities of each director. Spielberg approaches the cosmic unknown with a playful curiosity and an earnest sense of wonder that you see in Close Encounters, E.T. and Jurassic Park, while Hooper, coming from a more cynical, harder-edged horror background, sees an alien and malevolent other, ready to exploit our most human of weaknesses. As far as visceral thrills are concerned, it's hard to think of another horror movie from the decade that can match the propulsiveness of Poltergeist. But a great horror film does more than thrill. It lingers. The unique creative ingredients both Spielberg and Hooper brought, as well as their shared sense of biting social satire, have fittingly given Poltergeist an extended afterlife 40 years later, even as specific cultural elements have become unrecognizable to newer generations.